white privilege, it's the privilege of being a cis person in general, the privilege of being a man, and basically what it has to do is access. In general, it's a question of access. So that's how we're going to be looking at it here. A question, like something that someone can access that they're given an unfair advantage to accessing. So, okay, we could go have a whole conversation on just that. Don't want to go there. And finally, the prison industrial complex. Folks know what the prison industrial complex is? Kinda. So I kind of want to quote Angela Davis on this one. It's so simple. It's so simple and it's so deep. Complex actors and institutions working systemically who benefit from ensuring the entrapment of people in the penal system. So in a capitalist economy, everything becomes increasingly privatized. Every little aspect of a prison is privatized. If you go to San Quentin, there's San Quentin Village. It's like a town where everybody who works in San Quentin lives. But it's an economic force that runs on people. And it's largely proven to be disproportionately racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic set of institutions, and largely ineffective. It's good at keeping itself existing, but it's not actually good at preventing any of the things that it's claiming to. So this is a lot of evidence coming, you know what I mean? This is not a new realization, but it's a different issue in our age. Is there anything you want to say about Cassie at all?
A lot.
Okay, good. So I spent a lot of time on that. So now I'm going to move into a little bit of my personal story. I identify as queer, transgender, transsexual, genderqueer, also white, a number of other things we can get to later, and you can, be aware of, what I'm saying comes from my positionality. So it comes with all my limits and my privileges and my insights as well. So, that's that. And these identities aren't really the whole of who I am, but they're just sort of how I'm seen and how I engage politically, et cetera, et cetera. So, one thing I want to say is that, again, I'm a human being. I didn't come into this work around violence in queer communities, especially transgender communities, transgender women, by accident or simple curiosity. I have a huge bias. I came to it because I've walked through great trauma. I came to it because I'm plagued by learned fear. I came to it because I've experienced and seen great triumph from all of these things related to my trans identity and personage within communities that I take part in. I've experienced these things not because there's something wrong with being trans, rather because there's something deeply flawed about a society which smothers attempts at authenticity of expression. There's something very right, urgent, and imperative about those fighting against the trans dilemma. And I believe this is not only true for trans, queer, gender, sex deviant people. Deviant, I use that word affectionately, but but that's a bit of a reclaiming. Diverse. This freedom of expression is also essential for everyone who is affected by the tyranny of modernity and its effects on our genders, gender roles, bodies, and lives. So, is there anybody who's just like 100% okay with their body and their gender all the time? No? Okay, then we got something in common. We're working together. So, it's important for all of us. in this section, I'll try to relate some of my personal and lived experience into some of the theoretical framework that I'm using. And if you want to talk about resources and theoretical backgrounds for this talk, we can do that, but I'm not about to put it in APA right now. This is just a personal conversation. So I didn't come up with all of these ideas. Most of them I didn't. It's well thought, it's a well-tread path. I'm just hoping to take part in it. But I do have my experience. So, folks can probably relate to this. I've always felt kind of different. Never quite like I had just belonged, right? I imagine I'm not the only one who's felt that way. And I'd argue that that's a little bit of a tendril of colonialism, even within me being white, because colonialism kind of doesn't want us all to feel like we belong. We're not supposed to see the similarities in each other. We're supposed to see how different we all are and work against each other, because that's how capitalism works as well, and that's how an other is created. The other that's not you, so you can destroy it or belittle it or exoticize it or what have you. So when I was young, probably around, I'm going to talk a little bit about personal experiences. When I was probably around 8 or so, 9, I was living on the East Coast at this time, I first learned that I was a sissy. And I learned this because my stepdad came home drunk and kicked me to the floor and called me a faggot. Now, little did he know. But this was my first experience with offending the notion of masculinity, offending the notion of my male privilege. I didn't know why. I thought I was sensitive. That's what my mom said anyways. He's just sensitive. Okay. And that was my excuse for everything. I never liked Barbies. I'm not that kind of trans girl. Okay. A lot of people are, and there's a whole world of diversity, as we can say. I don't fit a DSM IV description of a transsexual. I'm pretty sure no one does. Just like no one fits the descriptions of being a woman or a man. You know what I mean? Those are ideals. So the only difference is it's a big issue in terms of access to medical necessities for me. So I go into the office of a therapist who holds the golden key, and I do a little trans dance, and I say, "I'm a real girl." And if I'm lucky, they'll give me my hormones. Okay. So this is a question of privilege, and also of kind of a pathologizing of the trans experience. And it's also an effect of globalization in the sort of making of one trans identity, that there is one trans body that we all have to fit into, and if you don't, then too bad. So that's kind of the effect of globalization. We can use terms like homogenous. This is whatever. Anyways, so in school, I was in many closets for safety, whatever. Skipping ahead, I moved to San Francisco around 2.5, 3 years ago. At that time, it's kind of funny, I have the sort of one stereotype I do have is sort of the archetypal San Francisco experience. When I moved here, I literally lived with a circus. I slept on the stage. I was broke. That's what happened, and that was where I started transitioning with free clothes that I had come across here and there. I started trying to live the life, right? Be in them as the generation that I'm mentored by would say I was in them. So we can talk about that as capitalism. You know, I applied at over 50 jobs, and maybe everybody's applying at over 50 jobs, and it doesn't have to do with me being trans, but probably doesn't help that I'm definitely not passing. You know, I'm definitely just very in early transition, what have you. So then I moved into Lark Inn, which is a subset of San Francisco homeless youth services, at-risk youth services, because I was without any other opportunities. In this facility, the majority of people were queer people of color. And that's not a coincidence. I could be wrong, and someone could check me on this, but I'm pretty sure proportionally queer people of color are actually the highest homeless youth rate in San Francisco. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We can dig into it a little bit, but capitalism is definitely one. As well as racism, obviously. And so in this environment, it's in the Tenderloin, there's a few things that trans girls do if they're working hard. And that is largely sex work and also the drug trade. And because historically, those are your options. That's what's available. Because we can't get jobs, you know what I mean? A lot of us have already, even as youth, had run-ins with police. So this is the temptation and also the pressure. And it's gotten better. I can't sit up here and play the victim. My elders have done a lot of work so that I can have the privileges that I do have. You know, I'm here in this school, we're here in this room. I helped organize this event, right? So a lot has changed. But we can look at that, and that's the whole thing about sex work and the trans communities is there's this thing called the prison pipeline. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but especially Black and brown people. And also there's similar or relatable phenomena within trans and queer communities. You get a mark on your record, even if it's just a fight you got in school, even if you got sent home for wearing the wrong clothes maybe, right? You get a mark on your name. That mark on your name turns into getting arrested one day, even as a minor. That mark on your name turns into, you know, being, 75% more likely to go into prison, especially if you're Black or brown. And so that's called the prison pipeline. And so for people trying to get out of the Tenderloin and out of sex trade, it's very difficult because, and not everybody chooses the sex trade because they're so oppressed and they're forced. I'm not even gonna stand up here and say that, right? Because then I'd be lying, you know? But a lot of people do. And that's the truth of it. So that's the prison pipeline. That's where a lot of issues of HIV in trans communities being very high. Also assaults, you know, if you didn't disclose, it's risky business, right? So anyways, that's the thing. So then, as I moved out of there, what happened to me, and you can interpret this is my personal experience, take it or leave it, was I felt most supported by mostly people of color. I felt my white communities slipping away, especially within the Castro, which is, as we know, the gayborhood of San Francisco, right? But what's considered the queer colony of San Francisco is realistically majority gay, white, cis men. and a lot of whom can pass as straight men, so that you can still get the privilege of a straight guy. And so I didn't get the support from those communities like I thought I would. Later on, I started to, once I started passing more. My white community started showing up again. And that's just my experience. It's not everybody's experience. But you can take it or leave it. Questions of privilege come up. The absolute offense of standing up against a patriarchal, heteropatriarchal system is that people who are for it are uncomfortable around you. Because my experience is that if I'm choosing not to take part in it by expressing my gender or what have you authentically, then it offends the people who are fighting for it, because it's revealing in some way. So, anyways, I continue to carry a lot of physical and constant stress, fear with me, and it's things I've learned. It's in my body, it's in my shoulders. I've learned it. It's for a reason. Anyways, I became increasingly politicized as I started seeing that people in my communities, especially trans people, were getting disproportionately assaulted, raped, murdered. Bernie Martell, we can talk about that, in Oakland. And generally having a hard time of it. So I became increasingly politicized. And I began to try to figure out a way to use the privileges that I have to be an ally. And so, right, this room, all this. So my personal trauma related to my own instances of confrontation with these various forms of assault has begun to open into a slow process of healing, and that's happened through mostly community engagement for me. And I could say just a little quick thing, if you want to look again for the power of the prison industrial complex, I tried to do one of these panels at Larkin, and I was told that I can't tell staff to avoid calling the police because that creates an unsafe environment. And I said that they don't have to listen, but that it's my job to say it, because 9% of assaults against LGBTQH communities are by police officers, increasingly for trans communities, especially trans women of color. So I said, it's my job to say that. That's why you want me to speak, trust me. But I can't say that. What I can do is hold a trans sensitivity training, which I can do too, and that's important too. So anyways, I went to CIS to do the one that I'm doing. And I'm going to try to go a little bit through this next part kind of quickly, and I'm sorry, but I just want to keep the timing moving so we can have time for questions and stuff. So a little thing that I wrote. What is it about the trans body or the transitivity of gender that is so offensive? Why are trans women, and especially trans women of color, murdered, abused, traumatized, and brutalized at such disproportionate levels? Trans people and trans women in particular are, by our very nature, illegal. As Miss Major would say, if you're a trans woman and you haven't had a run-in with the police yet, count your lucky stars. Because it's more than likely that you'll have one in your lifetime. We defy the rules of capital, so we are in a sense post-capital. We cannot help it. In our world of modernity, we're told that individuals exist and that the root of our happiness is our ability to rise to the challenge. What then of those who have a greater rising to do to meet that challenge? What about those to whom the challenge itself is by all means beyond reach? Trans women are against the law. Literally, we were for a long time, and if you look at ENDA, the ACLU version with the trans discrimination piece is just now being addressed federally, currently. When I was working for human rights, whatever, heinous organization, whatever, like less than half the country had signed on to ENDA. And regardless of if you believe in a rights agenda for trans people or not, that's pretty notable. So trans people are against the law, because we can't help but deny capital. Often spectrally gendered landscapes cannot be adequately controlled by the measures of exploitation and commodification that capitalism demands. We're given unequal access to the tools needed to succeed and then punished for our inability to be adequately exploited. Example, a lot of trans people can't or choose not to make sort of a holy matrimony model of capitalist reproduction of the labor force. And that's a whole concept unto itself, and I'm not going to really go into it, but think about it. Fill in the blanks. How can this be? Since we cannot, in good liberal posture, be outright genocided, we are instead extinguished through largely hidden mechanisms of structural control. The real and confusing thing about this is that being trans in and of itself is not a harm to anyone. If anything, we offer alternatives to the riddles of subversive and concrete gender roles mandated against cis or non-trans people as well. We say to people that they exist in a web of cultural and political interactions that demand that you do not question your gender and sex. But instead, many people see either a threat to be destroyed or something foreign and exotic to be controlled and made to feel other or less than. The deeper catch to this idea of the fact that being transgender is inherently harmless is the fact that it is not even us that the people are often trying to destroy. It's my argument that it's the idea of us.